If you've watched our 6-liter or 6.4-liter Power Stroke videos, you probably get the impression that we absolutely hate Navistar International, who's the engine builder behind those aforementioned engines. And yes, those two engines are absolutely terrible, but you have to remember that Navistar International does a lot more than just building light-duty truck engines. And really, their best engine ever, arguably, is the DT466, and it's an absolutely legendary diesel engine. So in this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the International DT466, and I'm going to show you what makes it such a legendary engine, the goods, the bads, and everything else you need to know about it. To get this whole thing started, we have to rewind the clock all the way back to 1967, which is when International began development of their 300 and 400 engine series. Back then, International had multiple divisions, and one of them being the Construction Equipment Division. And that division had its own engine division, which was a little awkward because International had its own engine division based out of Indianapolis. With that in mind, the VP of the Construction Equipment Division, Bill Wallace, was the one who actually wanted a new line of in-house engines that were fully designed and built by International. Reportedly, it was a big uphill battle, but Bill eventually convinced them to develop a new line of engines by taking the idea higher up, as basically all International divisions at that time needed an engine upgrade. So what better time to develop a new line of engines to cover multiple divisions of the company as a whole? With that in mind, that's how we ended up with the 300 and 400 engine series. They shared the same basic structure and architecture, a lot of the same parts, and they were built on the same tooling and nearly the same assembly lines. What makes these two engine families so interesting is that they both have engines with different displacements and power levels within the 300 and 400 series, but both engine series have their own shared bore sizing. What I mean by this is that all 300 series engines have a bore of 3.875 inches and all 400 series have a bore of 4.3 inches, with the largest of the 400 engine series coming in with a 5.35 inch stroke, which is the DT466. Fast forward to 1971, and the initial plan for the entire 300 line, the 414 and the 436, was to be mainly used by the AG division in tractors and combines. The DT466, on the other hand, was supposed to be used mostly in construction equipment. Soon that changed, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. The 414 and the 436 found immediate homes in the International tractor lines. The D414 debuted in the 1971 966 tractor, and the DT414 debuted in the 1066, and the DT436 and the 1466 and the 4166 four-wheel drive tractors. It wasn't until 1973 that the DT466 appeared in the 4366 four-wheel drive tractor. All of these tractor engines had a history of excellent service and usability in the International Harvester tractors, and even a little bit past that on the AG side of International Harvester when it was sold off and became Case International Harvester. Unfortunately, the aforementioned engines used by the AG division didn't really draw in all that much attention outside of the tractor world, as the naturally aspirated versions really didn't have much to offer beyond just simple tractors, which is when the DT466 was let loose to more than just tractors. After a very expensive tooling investment to the tune of around $500,000, the DT466 was now available to the truck market, and it became an option for the Fleet Star, then the Cargo Star, the Pay Star, and last, the Load Star. All these received the DT466 between January 1975 and the summer of 1976. As compared to some of the other engines available in these platforms, such as the D150, the D170, and the D190, the DT466 offered significantly more power, better fuel economy, more reliability, and best of all, it could easily be rebuilt in chassis, removing the need for fully removing the engine for a rebuild. At that time, the medium-duty truck market had been evolving towards diesels, but the perfect engine, the engine that would eventually take over, hadn't been offered yet. Sure, International had a few engines on this market, including the D301, the D358, the DV462, and the DV550, as well as others. And other companies like Perkins, Cat, Cummins, and Detroit Diesel were also in this space. And don't get me wrong, all of those companies had some great engines in their own right, but International was about to completely take over the market by storm with the DT466, which quickly became the engine to beat in the medium-duty truck market. The original DT466 was built in 1977 and featured the AMBAC Model 100 rotary pump, but when the DT466B popped up shortly after the introduction of the original engine, the original then became the DT466A. Throughout the years, there were a ton of different changes to the DT466, with multiple power figures throughout. Although there were a lot of changes, the easiest way to break it down is with 4 generations of this engine, including the DT466A and B from the 1971 to 1981, the DT466C from 1982 to 1992, the DT466P from 1993 to 1995, and last, the DT466E from 1995 to 2016. Throughout the near half-century run of this engine, many aspects actually stayed the same, including the super beefy, heavy cast iron deep skirt block. The crankcase itself weighs a ridiculous 400 pounds with massive bulkhead sections and main bearing surfaces. Interestingly enough, something that did change throughout the years was the bore and stroke. Earlier versions of the DT466 used a 4.3-inch bore and a 5.35-inch stroke, while the later engines used a 4.59-inch bore and a 4.68 stroke. We see this kind of trend with pretty much all modern engines using closer to bore to stroke ratio for a variety of reasons. One of the features that made this engine unique as compared to other medium-duty engines of the time is the use of wet sleeve cylinder liners. These ductile iron liners gave the DT466 a level of durability and serviceability that hadn't previously been seen on a medium-duty truck engine. Instead, wet sleeves were typically reserved for much larger engines, such as Class 8 engines or even larger. Because each bore uses its own sleeve, the engine is repairable in the case that a piston explodes and damages the cylinder, or anything else damages the cylinder for that matter. This makes the in-frame rebuild process even easier, which was one of the initial draws to this engine in the first place, thanks to its inline-6 configuration. Inside the engine, you'll find a massive 150-pound forged steel crankshaft with induction-hardened journals for improved wear resistance. The crank is bolted into place by 7 main bearings, which got bigger as the DT466 changed throughout the years. Bolted to that beefy crankshaft, you'll find equally beefy connecting rods. Depending on the version that you're looking at, you can see the OEM connecting rods hold up to over 1,500 horsepower, which again shows how beefy and overbuilt this engine is, especially considering the factory power output is about 1/7 of that 1,500 horsepower figure. On top of the block, we have another massive component, which is the cylinder head, weighing in at a ridiculous 250 pounds. Depending on the version of the engine, you'll either find 2 valves or 4 valves. Both versions feature ductile iron rocker arms, hardened valve seats, and 6 bolts per cylinder. That being said, the biggest weak point on the DT466 is actually found here, with the OEM head bolts being the weak link of the entire engine. That being said, you generally won't see any head or head gasket issues until you're north of 1,000 horsepower. So in stock form, it's really a non-issue. The oldest versions of the DT466 come in around 1,400 pounds when fully dressed but dry, with the modern versions of this engine weighing even more thanks to emissions control systems, with some models tipping the scales at over 1,900 pounds. And really, that's the overarching theme of the DT466 as a whole. It's insanely heavy, typically a few hundred pounds heavier than similar engines from International's competitors, while also being very underpowered. While that's not great for performance, it's great for reliability and keeping the engine in one piece when you do eventually crank the power up over 4 figures. Throughout its 45-year run, this engine saw tons of changes, from mechanical injection to electronic injection, non-intercooled to intercooled, and emissions-free to emissions-plagued. That being said, it always used direct injection, turbocharging, a strong and heavy-duty block, and a simple architecture. With that in mind, let's quickly hop into each generation so I can explain what makes each one unique, starting with the DT466B. This variant was rather obviously very similar to the DT466A, as they came out at similar times, and really they're just subvariants of each other. One of the changes to the B engine was a revised ring pack to reduce oil consumption as compared to the A engine. The compression ratio was also increased from 15.5 to 1 to 16.3 to 1 to help bump up power a bit and help with cold starts, which again, that's one of the overarching themes with the DT466, is that it's pretty underpowered. The B engine also received wider main and rod bearings. We then eventually saw another subvariant pop up, which was the DTI 466B, with the I standing for intercooled. Both the DT466B and the DTI 466B used the aforementioned AMBAC 100 injection pump, and they had power ratings ranging from 160 horsepower up to 210 horsepower. Fast forwarding up to 1982, and the DT466C was introduced, and they made a number of improvements, including larger lifters, an improved oiling system, and changing the injection pump to the Bosch MW. There was a turbocharged version of this engine, and then 2 intercooled turbocharged versions of this engine. The air-to-air intercooled model was known as the DTA466C, and the air-to-water model was known as the DTI466C. By 1987, the DTA466C produced 240 horsepower and 609 pound-feet of torque. To help keep the new increased power figure cool, the water pump was also upgraded as compared to the earlier engines. That takes us up to 1993, where the DT466 yet again went under a transformation following a few years of development. This time around, it was designated as the DT466PLN-NGD, which stood for Pump Line Nozzle New Generation Diesel. Really, a lot of this was kind of some marketing ploys, as the engine was still mechanically injected and pretty similar to the previous engine, but that was soon to change. The NGD PLN engines had a high mounted pump and a cast squared off valve cover with notches for the injectors. They either used a Bosch P3000 or P7100 injection pump. And depending who you ask, this is considered to be the best DT466 ever, as the Bosch P7100 pump flows significantly more than previous injection pumps, which means that it's much easier to crank up the fueling and ultimately crank up the power. This version of the DT466 was rated at 275 horsepower and 800 pound-feet of torque, which again is still underpowered given its engine size, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. But unfortunately, as the story of pretty much every diesel engine goes, the EPA began to enforce stricter standards, which required cleaner diesel engines. And so International joined forces with Caterpillar in the mid-90s to develop the Hydraulic Electric Unit Injector, also known as HEUI. As a result of their development of this new electric injector came the DT466E that was introduced in May of 1995. And along with the new electric injection system came a new cylinder head. The bottom end also featured all the same upgrades that we saw in the DT466P. Power for the new DT466E ranges from 195 horsepower up to 250 horsepower, with the later Max Force engines reaching upwards of 300 horsepower and even higher. Unfortunately, the introduction of the electronic injection system was really the downfall of the DT466, as it was incredibly reliable before all the electronics, but never reached that kind of reliability again with the electronic injection system. That system is known for being very problematic and having a ton of little failing points that can cause the engine to not run entirely. Ironically, the rest of the engine is still just as good as ever. That strong and reliable base is still there, but the electronics draped on top of it cause an immeasurable amount of problems in the long run. So that's a brief summary of the legendary story of the DT466 from Navistar International. And really, a lot of people, like I said at the start, like to clown on the Navistar International name for creating the 6-liter Power Stroke and the 6.4-liter Power Stroke. And while those engines are very terrible in their own right, the DT466 represents what Navistar is capable of and what most diesel engines, including modern diesel engines, are capable of when they're not plagued with electronics and emissions control systems thanks to the EPA. The DT466 really changed the medium-duty truck market forever, and it's never been the same. It was arguably the best engine ever in that market. It's super reliable, it's nearly bulletproof, it's super easy to work on, it offers a decent amount of power, although it is underpowered given its weight, and it just does the job simply well, and it's not going to break on you. In fact, people love this engine so much that you can still see it being used today, although not new. It is being used in a lot of tractor pulling events, where the high horsepower versions of this engine, where people are really cranking them up, those engines can see upwards of 4,000 horsepower at 300 psi of boost pressure, and they're still holding together. Sure, that's not a stock engine, but it goes to show just how strong the DT466 is. International produced over 2 million of these engines, and you can find them in a lot of different things, from box trucks, school bus trucks, construction equipment, farm tractors, and a whole lot more. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to smash the thumbs up button, get subscribed so you don't miss out on future videos. Drop a comment down below if you think there's anything I missed or anything you want to add. Drop it down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.